Whispers on Steel, Book 1 of the Railway Inheritance, written by Melody Gilly. Chapter 11. Sullivan closed the kitchen door behind him, his measured stride accelerating once out of Sonya's sight. The private line's persistent ring echoed through the empty corridors, Morrison, undoubtedly, with questions about Gregory Constance's whereabouts and Sonya's sudden disappearance from the cottage. The study door yielded to his touch, its familiar creak a prelude to difficult conversations. Unlike most of Whispering Pines, this room bore Sullivan's personal imprint. Modern reference books alongside leather-bound classics, contemporary business journals stacked beside ancient railway ledgers. The marriage of past and present, of von Vogel legacy and Sullivan's vision, manifested in physical form. He lifted the antique telephone receiver, its weight substantial in his hand. "Von Vogel," he answered, his voice calibrated to project calm confidence, despite the tension coiling within him. "Where have you been?" Morrison's voice carried its usual precision, though an unusual edge suggested genuine concern rather than mere irritation. "The cottage is empty. The girl is gone. Helena Matthews is here at Whispering Pines," Sullivan replied, watching shadows dance across the room as the wind disturbed the trees outside his window. "She was concerned about her uncle and was preparing to leave when I arrived to deliver my letter." A weighted silence followed this admission. Sullivan could almost hear Morrison's rapid calculations, the mental adjustments to whatever contingency plans he'd developed. "Gregory Constant has been involved in an unfortunate accident," Morrison said finally, the careful phrasing revealing more than the words themselves. "His vehicle left the road several hours ago. He's currently unavailable for communication." Sullivan's grip tightened on the receiver, though his voice remained steady. "How unfortunate. Was anyone else involved in this accident?" "A single vehicle incident, according to preliminary reports." Morrison's tone suggested he recognized Sullivan's actual question, though his condition remains uncertain. Translation: Gregory had been deliberately run off the road, but remained alive, at least for now. Sullivan processed this information, adjusting his calculations accordingly. "The midnight shipment proceeds as scheduled," he said, deliberately shifting to business matters, establishing his continued commitment despite these complications. "The cargo arrived at the private siding 30 minutes ago. Transfer to the specialized container cars is underway." "Excellent." Morrison's approval carried subtle relief. "And the girl? What have you told her?" Sullivan glanced toward the closed study door, picturing Sonya in his kitchen, surrounded by Whispering Pines' spectral guardians. "Nothing that compromises operations. She's aware of historical parallels, but not current implementations." "Can she be managed?" The euphemism hung between them, its implications clear. "She's under my protection," Sullivan replied, a slight emphasis on the possessive. "Her presence at Whispering Pines provides security for all parties while we determine the next steps." "A convenient arrangement," Morrison observed, something knowing entering his tone. "History repeating itself with interesting variations." Sullivan ignored the provocation. "The midnight shipment will depart on schedule. I'll oversee the transfer personally at Harrogate Junction as planned." "Your dedication to business obligations is commendable," Morrison said, "particularly given these personal complications." "The railway restoration remains my priority," Sullivan stated firmly. "Tonight's shipment represents significant advancement toward our mutual objectives." "Indeed." Morrison paused, then added, "Remember our discussion about Matthews women and von Vogel men, Sullivan. Such connections historically yield unfortunate outcomes. History only repeats for those who fail to learn its lessons," Sullivan countered. "I'll contact you after the shipment transfer is complete." The line disconnected with a soft click, leaving Sullivan standing in the study's half-shadows. For a moment, he remained motionless, the weight of conflicting obligations pressing against him. Duty to the family business, protection of Sonya, and his carefully constructed plans for advancement within Morrison's network. "Well handled," a voice observed from the darkened corner beside the fireplace. You've always had a talent for selective truth. Sullivan didn't turn, didn't need to. He'd grown accustomed to this particular visitation over the years. Not now, Sebastian. His uncle's ghost emerged from shadow, as substantial seeming as any living man, though slightly translucent when viewed directly. Sebastian von Vogel in his prime, early 40s, impeccably dressed in 1940s business attire, radiating the confident authority that had defined his living presence. Business above all, Sebastian observed, moving to examine the railway maps spread across Sullivan's desk. The true von Vogel inheritance. Your father lacked that essential quality. Too much sentiment, too little practicality. He smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. You've proven a more worthy successor. Your approval means less than you might imagine, Sullivan replied, returning the telephone to its cradle. Sebastian chuckled, the sound carrying an unearthly hollowness. Yet you follow my footsteps with remarkable precision. Private shipments on midnight trains, strategic alliances with powerful men, even the Matthews woman taking shelter under your roof. His spectral hand gestured toward the kitchen's direction. Though I must admit, your Helena is considerably more spirited than mine was. Stronger, perhaps. Sonya is nothing like her mother, Sullivan said sharply. And I am nothing like you, aren't you? Sebastian's eyebrow rose with skeptical amusement. Tonight, you'll oversee your first weapons shipment to enemies of your country, prioritizing profit over patriotism. The cargo may have changed, but the essential calculation remains identical. He circled the desk, his movements fluid yet somehow wrong, as if gravity affected him differently. The true von Vogel legacy, creating empires while nations rise and fall around us. Sullivan turned to face his uncle's ghost directly. I'm building upon your legacy, not simply replicating it. Morrison believes this is merely a test of my loyalty, but he fails to recognize ambition when it stands before him. So you tell yourself, Sebastian replied, seeming pleased rather than concerned by this declaration. The railway lines do flow with your blood, as they did with mine. The midnight freight calls to you as it called to me. His smile turned knowing. You understand what I always knew. True power lies in controlling the routes by which all things must travel. Morrison merely inherited my position. He didn't earn it as you intend to. Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating Sebastian's form with stark clarity. Not the confident businessman he projected, but something more damaged. For a moment, burns became visible across his face, his clothing, charred and torn as he must have appeared after the explosion that claimed his life. Morrison underestimates me, Sullivan said, looking away from the momentary revelation of his uncle's true spectral state. As he underestimated you until it was too late, do I detect ambition to supplant rather than merely serve? Sebastian's voice carried sardonic amusement. The Matthews girl is already transforming from strategic asset to personal weakness, just as her mother did with Morrison. History repeating with remarkable fidelity, Sullivan stiffened. What do you know about Morrison and Helena? Sebastian's laugh echoed oddly in the study's confines. The dead know many things, nephew. We see past performances that living players prefer to forget. He moved closer, the temperature dropping notably with his proximity. Ask yourself why Morrison watches the girls so carefully, why he warned you away from attachment with such specific concern. Before Sullivan could respond, the study door opened, admitting a far gentler presence, Elisabeth's ghost, her form less substantial than Sebastian's, but somehow more peaceful, the soft glow around her contrasting with the shadows that seemed to cling to her husband. Sebastian, she acknowledged, voice distant yet clear. Haunting the living again? The male ghost inclined his head with mock courtesy. Elisabeth, still interfering in business matters beyond your understanding. Leave the boy alone, she replied, her protective instinct extending beyond death. Your ambition destroyed you once already. Has it? Sebastian's form began fading, though his voice remained. Ask Morrison about the Dresden explosion sometime, Sullivan. Ask who truly orchestrated my convenient removal when I became problematic. His final words hung in the air as his form dissolved entirely. Like nephew, like uncle, we all face betrayal from those closest to us once we've served our purpose. Elisabeth's ghost lingered a moment longer, offering Sullivan a sad smile before she too faded, leaving him alone with Sebastian's troubling insinuations. Sullivan checked his watch. Barely an hour remained before the midnight freight required his presence at Harrogate Junction. The weapons shipment Morrison had arranged represented a significant opportunity, a crucial first step in his larger strategy. Once he proved himself with this initial transfer to the Hamburg connection, Morrison would grant him greater responsibility, access to more sensitive operations, and eventually a position from which Sullivan could begin his careful ascent. He moved to his desk, unlocking a hidden drawer to retrieve documents carefully compiled over months, evidence of Morrison's operations, intelligence that could destroy the man should circumstances require such measures. Insurance, essentially, against the fate Sebastian had just implied, awaited those who became inconvenient to Morrison's plans. As Sullivan prepared to return to the kitchen to explain his imminent departure to Sonya, he found himself considering Sebastian's words about history repeating. The parallels were undeniable. Another von Vogel man overseeing midnight shipments, another Matthews woman uncovering uncomfortable truths, another constant pursuing justice delayed by decades. Yet, parallels did not necessitate identical outcomes. Unlike Sebastian, Sullivan recognized the true nature of Morrison's operations and his provisional status within them. Unlike Sebastian, he had prepared for inevitable betrayal before it could materialize. Unlike his uncle, Sullivan intended not merely to profit from these shadowy operations, but eventually to control them entirely. Tonight's shipment would proceed as planned, the first test of many that would establish his value to Morrison's network. The weapons would transfer to their Russian buyers via the Hamburg connection. Morrison would receive confirmation of successful operations, and Sullivan would secure his position within the organization, just long enough to learn its inner workings, its vulnerabilities, its leverage points. Sebastian's ghost had been right about one thing: business, above all, remained the von Vogel way. But Sebastian had never understood the most important business principle: strategic patience in the pursuit of ultimate control. Sullivan straightened his tie, composed his expression, and prepared to return to Sonya with carefully curated explanations of unavoidable business obligations. Like his uncle before him, he would conduct tonight's railway operations with precision and discretion. Unlike Sebastian, however, he intended to survive long enough to claim Morrison's position as his rightful inheritance. The midnight freight would run tonight as scheduled. The weapons would reach their destination. The von Vogel lines would serve their shadowy purpose once more, and Sullivan von Vogel would take his first step toward reclaiming what had been lost when his uncle's train exploded in the darkness near Dresden so many years ago. "I need to attend to this railway matter," Sullivan explained, his voice carrying carefully measured regret as he returned to the kitchen. "It cannot be postponed, particularly given current circumstances." Sonya nodded, still processing what she'd witnessed in the hallway. "How long will you be gone?" "A few hours at most. The transfer requires personal supervision, but the actual process is relatively efficient." He checked his watch, a gesture she'd noticed he performed when transitioning between topics or obligations. "I should show you where you can rest while I'm away." The grandfather clock in the hall showed nearly 11 as Sullivan led her up the mansion's main staircase, each step seeming to carry them deeper into Whispering Pines history. The upper landing opened to a long corridor with doors set at regular intervals, most closed and, Sonya suspected, long unused. "The East Wing bedrooms remain essentially as they were when my parents were alive," Sullivan explained, passing these doors without pausing. "I haven't had reason to maintain them for guests." They turned down another corridor where evidence of regular habitation became more apparent: polished floors, fresh paint, and the subtle scent of beeswax and cedar replacing the mustier notes of neglect. Sullivan stopped before a substantial oak door, opening it to reveal a spacious bedroom that served as his private sanctuary. Unlike the preserved formality of the downstairs rooms, this space reflected genuine daily use. A substantial four-poster bed with plain, navy bedding, a worn leather armchair positioned near the fireplace, and bookshelves filled with well-handled volumes rather than decorative bindings. Modern touches interspersed with antiques suggested practical comfort rather than historical reverence. "You should be comfortable here," Sullivan said, moving to open adjoining doors. "The bathroom connects through here, and there are fresh towels in the linen press. I've taken the liberty of having Mrs. Jessup place some essential toiletries there as well." Sonya stood in the center of the room, understanding the implications. "This is your bedroom?" "Yes." His admission carried no artifice. "It's the only properly maintained sleeping accommodation in the house. I'll use one of the guest rooms tonight." "That seems unnecessary," she began, then hesitated, aware of how her words might be interpreted. Sullivan's expression revealed nothing beyond polite concern for her comfort. Whispering Pines can be disorienting for those unaccustomed to its peculiarities. This room has proven the least susceptible to certain atmospheric anomalies. The scientific phrasing of what was a reference to ghostly manifestations almost made Sonya smile despite the evening's tensions. "You mean the ghosts prefer other rooms?" "Elisabeth tends to frequent the music room and conservatory," Sullivan replied with surprising candor, "while Sebastian's presence is generally limited to the study and certain parts of the East Wing. This suite has remained relatively undisturbed by either." His matter-of-fact acknowledgement of the mansion's supernatural residents struck Sonya as strangely reassuring, as if Sullivan's rational acceptance of the irrational somehow normalized the experience. "There are additional security features as well," he continued, gesturing towards sturdy locks on both the bedroom and bathroom doors, "should you feel the need for added privacy." The careful neutrality of his phrasing suggested he understood her potential concerns about staying alone in his home, particularly given what she'd learned about his business associations and family history. The consideration, however practical, touched her unexpectedly. "Thank you," she said simply. Sullivan nodded, moving toward the door. "I should prepare for departure. The railway junction requires my presence by midnight." At the threshold, he paused, turning back with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Your uncle's warning was not unfounded, Sonya. While I believe Whispering Pines offers the most secure immediate sanctuary, please exercise appropriate caution. Trust your instincts regarding any presences you might encounter." The double meaning was unmistakable, a warning about both supernatural manifestations and potential human threats. Before she could respond, he had gone, his footsteps receding down the corridor with quiet efficiency. Alone in Sullivan's domain, Sonya took stock of her surroundings more carefully. The room reflected its owner's contradictions. Expensive furnishings selected for comfort rather than show, classic literature alongside technical manuals, evidence of both privilege and practicality. On the bedside table stood a single photograph in a silver frame, a much younger Sullivan between his parents, his mother's resemblance to him immediately apparent in the shape of their eyes and mouth. The adjoining bathroom proved surprisingly modern despite its Victorian fixtures. Hot water flowed readily from brass taps, plush towels hung warmed on a heated rail, and essential toiletries had indeed been thoughtfully arranged. The simple human consideration behind these preparations contrasted sharply with the image of Sullivan as a cold-blooded businessman conducting midnight weapons shipments. After washing away the day's tensions and borrowing a clean shirt from Sullivan's wardrobe, her clothes were still damp from the rain. Sonya found herself drawn to the bedroom window. From this vantage point, the restored railway line was visible in the distance, moonlight gleaming on tracks that curved away toward the signal box where she and Sullivan had examined buried documents only days earlier. Somewhere out there, he was now overseeing the transfer of weapons destined for Soviet Russia, participating in the same kind of clandestine operations that had ultimately claimed his uncle's life. The parallels seemed too precise to be coincidental, the echoes across generations too perfectly aligned. Despite her intention to remain awake until Sullivan's return, to demand clearer explanations about what she'd overheard and what he truly intended, the emotional exhaustion of the day eventually claimed her. Sonya settled against the pillows, telling herself she would rest only briefly while waiting for the sound of his return. Sullivan's Jaguar purred quietly as he guided it up the long drive to Whispering Pines, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten with false dawn. The shipment had proceeded exactly as planned. Weapons components transferred to specialized container cars, documentation processed through carefully bribed officials, the midnight freight departing precisely on schedule for Hamburg, and points beyond. Morrison had seemed satisfied with Sullivan's performance, though his questions about Sonya's presence at Whispering Pines carried undertones of concern beyond mere operational security. Something in Morrison's manner suggested personal interest rather than professional caution, a distinction Sullivan found increasingly significant considering Sebastian's ghostly insinuations about Helena's relationship with the man. The mansion's silhouette emerged from pre-dawn darkness as Sullivan parked beside the entrance. Inside, the familiar stillness greeted him, not the emptiness of abandonment, but the patient quiet of a structure that had witnessed generations come and go, each leaving their imprint upon its spaces. He moved through darkened corridors with practiced ease, requiring no light to navigate paths he'd walked since childhood. The shipment's successful completion should have brought satisfaction, another step in his carefully constructed plan, another piece positioned for the endgame he'd designed. Instead, he felt hollowed out, caught between competing obligations that seemed increasingly irreconcilable. Reaching his bedroom door, Sullivan hesitated, listening for any sound that might indicate Sonya remained awake. Hearing nothing, he opened the door with deliberate quietness, intending only to retrieve fresh clothing before withdrawing to one of the guest rooms. The pre-dawn light filtering through partially open curtains revealed Sonya asleep in his bed, her golden hair spread across his pillow, her face softened in repose. She wore one of his shirts, the fabric emphasizing her vulnerability in surroundings that remained essentially strange to her. Despite the circumstances that had brought her to Whispering Pines, sleep had claimed her completely, suggesting either remarkable resilience or the bone-deep exhaustion that follows profound emotional upheaval. Sullivan should have withdrawn immediately. Instead, he found himself settling into the leather armchair near the bed, his body suddenly registering the fatigue of the night's activities, the tension of maintaining necessary appearances, the weight of decisions whose consequences stretched beyond his ability to fully calculate. What had begun as a strategic calculation regarding Helena Matthews' daughter had evolved into something more complicated, more personal. Watching Sonya sleep in his bed, Sullivan confronted possibilities he'd previously refused to consider. A future beyond Morrison's operations, beyond the von Vogel legacy, beyond the patterns established by previous generations. Sebastian's ghost had accused him of following familial footsteps with perfect fidelity. Perhaps there lay the fundamental error, not in embracing the von Vogel heritage, but in allowing it to determine his path rather than merely informing it. Helena had fled England rather than confront the dangers threatening her and her unborn child. Sonya had chosen to face those same dangers directly, to pursue truth regardless of personal risk. Different choices, different outcomes. Dawn's first true light began filtering through the curtains, casting golden patterns across the bed where Sonya slept. Sullivan's eyes had grown heavy, the night's exertions finally claiming their due, when he noticed her breathing change, the subtle shift from sleep to wakefulness occurring gradually rather than suddenly. Her eyes opened, focusing first on the unfamiliar ceiling, then scanning the room until they found him seated in the armchair. No fear registered in her expression, only momentary confusion followed by recognition. "You're back," she said simply, voice husky with sleep. "The transfer is complete," he confirmed, uncertain what else to offer. Explanations seemed simultaneously necessary and insufficient, the language of business transactions inadequate for what had transpired between them. Sonya studied him in the strengthening light, her gaze surprisingly direct for someone just awakened in unfamiliar surroundings. "You look exhausted. Professional hazard of midnight railway operations," he replied, attempting lightness that fell somewhat short. She shifted slightly, then extended her hand across the empty expanse of the bed beside her, a gesture both invitation and challenge. "You should rest." Sullivan regarded her outstretched hand, understanding the multiple thresholds it represented. A simple offer of shared space, perhaps, but also something more profound. A choice between isolation and connection, between patterns inherited and possibilities created. He hesitated, weighing consequences, calculating variables, following his nature as a von Vogel man, until Sonya's quiet voice cut through his deliberations. "Sometimes," she said, "the most difficult business decision is knowing when to stop calculating and start living." The echo of Elisabeth's philosophies in Sonya's words struck him with unexpected force. Sullivan rose from the chair, removing his jacket and shoes before accepting her outstretched hand. The mattress yielded beneath his weight as he stretched beside her, maintaining a careful distance that respected boundaries while acknowledging the intimacy of their position. Outside whispering pines, birds began their dawn chorus, their voices rising above the whisper of pine branches in the morning breeze. Within its walls, two people carrying the weight of previous generations' choices lay side by side, neither speaking further as exhaustion claimed them both. The ghosts of whispering pines, for once, remained silent witnesses rather than active participants in the unfolding drama beneath its roof. And then, if Sullivan had calculated correctly, everything would change.